Welcome to today's panel on the UAE's pioneering role in global space exploration. In recent years, the UAE has positioned itself as a leader in space research, most notably with ambitious Mars work. And the Emirates Mars mission, led by the UAE Space Agency and Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center, launched the Hope probe in 2020, making the UAE the first Arab nation to reach Mars and one of only 9 countries in history to explore the red planet. We're going to get into that, but I think first and foremost, I want to say thank you to Your Excellency, Salem Butti Al Qubaisi, the Director General of the UAE Space Agency, as well as His Excellency Salem Al Marri. I have to admit I'm a little nervous with 2 excellent salams. So I apologize in advance if I get that mixed up. But Al Marri, Director General of Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center. And this is a really interesting set of programs in the UAE. It's a completely innovative way to organize departments and agencies compared to a number of the other countries that are leading in space. And so I think the very first question is how do you operationalize the areas of the lead and support between your organizations within the national system here in the UAE, but what are the areas of lead and support for things that are as ambitious as the Hope probe or as ambitious of plans that lead 100 years in advance on space exploration for now a commercial industry that in the next decade could be $1 trillion. And so what are the areas of lead and support? How are you organized? And what does that mean for how you work with other countries in particular, multilateral institutions, commercial space industry, many of whom we're joined by in the room, as well as academic institutions? And how do you organize your work? How do you think about the relationship and the system within the UAE for space?
Which Salem do you want first?
Yes,
let's start with the Space Agency.
Okay. Well, thank you, Graham. I need to start by thanking the World Government Summit Organization, also the Atlantic Council for having us today through really a plethora of sessions related to space today, this afternoon. To answer, we need to give some context. The UAE Space Agency has been formed back in 2014. Mm-hmm. That year was the announcement of our first deep space mission, the Emirates mission to Mars. Mm-hmm. And it always resonates with me, the comment that His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, Vice President and Prime Minister of the UAE at the time, going through a really big challenge. I remember that it said, the day that we stop taking on challenges is the day that the UAE stops from going forward. And that's a pivotal, baseline for the whole space agency. We are apt in taking challenges and going further. We see that as an enabler in multiple fields within the country, whether it's in economics or whether in the transformation for knowledge-based economy. And that's a major goal to have. The relationship, as an agency, we're a federal agency, so we represent the government of the United Arab Emirates. And that entails that we're heavily involved in making sure that our partners in the sector have access to other space agencies, other institutions internationally, and that's why we have a long tally of memorandum of understandings, international instruments that are being signed through the federal entity, the UAE, which enables all the sector. And most importantly, at the time, back in 2014, was Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center, who was and still is our partner in the sector in general.
And how are you thinking through MBRSC?
Yeah, I think, first of all, if we look at the UAE, in my opinion, I think we have a bit of a unique situation. So typically, if you're going to have something to fund or regulate or put a strategy, you have to have something. Mm-hmm. And sometimes different countries will focus on putting regulations, putting strategies, putting policies, and then funding. And then those things will start an active space program. I think here, what we saw is that there was a vision from the leadership to start to nationalize the development of satellite systems, move away from being users and try and develop those systems here. And that's what happened at MBRC in 2005. And really started from very, very humble, small beginnings of 3 or 4 people that were sent on a technology transfer program to try and learn how to develop these systems. And about 10 years later, you're looking at satellites built in the UAE, missions to Mars. And of course, at that time, the government, of course, then put up a structure, as His Excellency Salem Butti mentioned, of regulation, support, and funding, as well as strategy. And I think the way that it worked in the UAE in that structure was very, I would say, kind of common sense. So it really worked well that you have something that is meaningful in the country, and then you are bringing in regulations to support that to grow. And if you look at, since the UAE Space Agency was established about 10 years or 11 years ago, look at the phenomenal growth that's happened in both entities and the space program. So I think that's our model, and that's really what happened. And the way we work is really focusing on the core programs that we have. So any program we go in, we look at what can we learn and how can we partner with our international partners. Not just what can we learn as well, how can we contribute to that program. So there are certain niche areas that we have capabilities in that we can contribute strongly in, and areas that we are weaker in, or areas that we want to grow. That's where we focus on learning and working together with our partners. And that model as well has so far been quite successful for us.
And in terms of the universe of space as a topic that we think about, including the universe itself, this now runs the gamut from low orbital major industry to deep space exploration. And on the latter, to your point on the day that we stop taking huge challenges is the day that we stop moving forward, the Hope probe is probably the best example of this. For an agency that it was developed a little over a decade ago, the ideation for it developed a little over a decade ago, to say, we're going to have the first complete picture of Mars. And then to operationalize that, 2 organizations around that with allies and partners, with industry, with academic partners, which I have to admit, I'm from Colorado. One of the partners is University of Colorado Boulder, and I don't think I'd be allowed to go home if I didn't give them a shout out. How does the ideation for that even develop? Where does the Hope probe come from? And what does the future look like? If it's in orbit right now, what are the next steps? What are you most excited about in achieving next with regard to Hope probe?
Well, thank you for the the question. The idea, I think, started back in 2013 in a cabinet retreat, where the last question was in the retreat is what we want to see the UAE be part of in the future. Something, ministers thinking out of the box, so you expect something big.
Was the Hope probe like the last idea on the thing? Was it like, we're going to become a global powerhouse, we're going to be a leader in trade, and then at the very end, is it we could go to Mars?
Exactly. And the initiation was a small slip of paper that each minister was supposed to, put. And one of them said Mars. It wasn't, what it is, what it can be formulated, but it took maybe less than 6 months to, catalyze that, crystallize the idea, and making something that needs to have multiple objectives. One, internationally, that we are part of, growing the human knowledge about Mars. Where are the gaps in that knowledge? Where we can do a program, and who's the partners, as you mentioned, Colorado University at the time was chosen, but there were multiple other choices that we could have taken. The determining factor was, I think, the goal of inspiring our youth. And I think there was no better mix than having an institute like an academic institute as a university, where it's, you know, it's bread and butter to teach youth, students to take, to have this formation, form this relationship that can last. And that was, I think, the inception at the time. And the operations side, we partnered with MBRSC, and that they've done a great job during the launch. Salem can tell you all the details, but COVID was right in the middle before launch, and there is a lot of challenges. The only thing that helped us at the time was having a great relation internationally that really, you know, helped us overcome all the impediments that the pandemic had put us through.
So the world is on lockdown.
Yeah.
You're working with students that are based at Emirati students based in Colorado.
Yeah.
You launched in Japan, and the world is locked down, and you're coordinating this entire effort.
Yeah.
How does that go, and what comes next after that very simple achievement?
It's a lot of fun, I would say, and it was an enjoyable time. But maybe before I go into that, I would say I think you know, the country deciding to go to Mars and celebrating the 50th anniversary of the UAE with that achievement was in itself a very big statement. But at that time, you know, when that decision was made, we had a small team in the UAE that is capable of working on satellite systems and learning, and we hadn't at that time even developed our own full system. So to come and say that you're going to have a very big goal, such as getting to Mars and working with international partners and achieving that goal really set, you know, like a moonshot at the end of the day. So you got a huge goal, and then just to achieve that objective, you really have to move everything and shift it 10 times bigger and better and work harder and really expand. And that's what we see happen. So if we look at in 2014, when it was launched, where we were when the program was launched, and then in 2021, when it arrived in Mars's orbit, it was a different scene in terms of space in the UAE. So for me, one of the biggest objectives of that program that I think succeeded very strongly is shifting the mindset that, you know, we can do these big, huge objectives, we can get to Mars, and we can do these projects collaboratively. And of course, you know, when you're doing project management, when you've got a strong team that's working together with international partners, you have to work together to achieve those objectives in difficult situations, whether it's COVID, whether it's failed launches, whether it's delays, whether, you know, whatever it may be. And I think that's what the team worked together. We had strong partners in Japan who really facilitated the team being in Japan, in Tanegashima Island, which was not easy during COVID, and making sure that that satellite can be launched. And then, of course, when it arrived, and all the coordination between NASA JPL, with Colorado, with our Japanese partners, and here in the UAE, it eventually worked well. And you've seen the beautiful imagery. It's still operating, and it's a mission that has a significant scientific contribution to our understanding of Mars.
We're going to shift in a moment to prioritization between Mars and some of the lunar exploration or lunar priorities that we have. But one last question on management, because I think this is such a fascinating statement of ambition, in that the goal right now is we're planning 100 years out. And 100 years from now, the goal is to have people on Mars. How do you shift an organization's thinking and operations towards a goal when 15 years ago it would have been unthinkable? And I say this with a high degree of humility coming from the United States, because it seems like we're planning things in 4-year increments right now. And that's a real challenge for achieving major century-long goals. So how are you thinking through how to build an organization that achieves something 100 years from now?
Yeah, I think, again, it's about having these very large objectives, these big objectives that you can look at and really start working towards. So having an objective from our leadership that it was set in 2017, so by 2117 we will have humans on Mars and living and thriving and working there. That is, of course, today a dream. And it's something that we look at as an objective that the UAE should be a contributing player in that global push towards getting humanity on the surface of Mars. And then how do we plan as an organization? So what we do is, we also do it like you do in the US in 4 yearly segments, but we do it in 5-year chunks. And because we have that big vision that eventually we want to have rovers, power sources, humans, life support systems, space stations, whatever it may be, working and living on Mars. So all of our projects that we are working on are gearing towards that. So if you look at the first 5 yearly segments, we've had rovers that we're sending to the surface of the moon. Of course, we've got the Mars probe jointly with the UAE Space Agency. We've had astronauts going to the International Space Station, but also some of their experiments are focused on potentially what long-duration missions can do and going to Mars. And then you have what we're doing around Gateway. And that is really a commitment from the UAE that we will be part of a large international collaboration to explore deep space, first on the moon, and then using that as a stepping stone to get to Mars. So everything, even though it's looking at the moon, it's looking at even closer to Earth, is really geared in these 5 yearly segments towards projects that will help us and help the UAE build capabilities that will contribute to us being hopefully a multi-planetary species and have that presence on Mars. But because we have that big goal, we're always looking at that and saying, okay, does this play into that? And that's how it really helps us.
And as for a federal government entity, our increment of planning is usually 10 years. So in the last, we're currently in the 2031 phase, started back in 2021, and was doped with Emirates. So the emphasis here, more investment on local partners, getting better, everything multiplied by 2 for targets, goals, KPIs. All of this ties into what my friend just said, Salem, that we're taking even longer increments to make sure that we are making a good pace to reach, the optimal goal 2117. But we recognize that we cannot do everything by ourselves. International collaboration is an underpin that will enable for the collective, humanity to be present and settle one day in the future on Mars. The other part is how to change the mindset. Well, the driver is, as I mentioned, before, is the leadership. Is taking more challenges and being part in every one of the major events during the milestones in MBRC was through the Hope probe, being part, present there during the moon insertion, and the Rashid rover even, and that's a great example as well. Rashid rover didn't make it, the first one, right. But our leadership, was there to go further, to go and continue all the program for having now 2 and 3 hopefully. So it's important that the driver is what we can accomplish, what we can showcase to our peers in the nation and internationally, that we are credible and we can accomplish achievements. And we see that as well in one of the programs that we have for the asteroid belt. The asteroid belt, had a different goal. We needed to focus on multiple partners, hence the formation of the national team, where everybody can contribute from institutions around the sector in general, whether public or private.
Harnessing everybody to be able to land on an asteroid.
Exactly, and that has another mindset to change, where everybody is thinking only one entity can do it, either commercial or public. We want to mix and match, try different models of operations for bigger projects like this. And for that, there are many breakthroughs. Some of the return on investment from the Hope probe is, today we see contribution of instrumentation, major instrumentation on the new Emirates mission to the asteroid belt from international partners that only was cultivated by having a strong relationship internationally, credible deep space programs, and the infrastructure that we have here in country.
Right. Well, and the incrementalization of that, the operationalization of that,
yes.
Is fascinating. To take the local logistics, ranging to the conversations with international partners to say 100 years from now, here's what we're going to be doing. And I really appreciate the call out on the asteroid landing mission as well, because that's another extraordinarily ambitious multinational effort in which UAE is playing a leading role. To go to prioritization, and thank you for indulging me on the management question, because it's such a fascinating way to change organizational culture in particular. How do you prioritize between such ambitious goals like Mars and some of the more immediate lunar priorities?
Well, the way we do it, of course, I mentioned a little bit about that. I think, Mars is the overall objective here, right? So it's not somewhere where humans have been before. And this is where we see, first of all, the global exploration roadmap is going towards exploring Mars, eventually having humans there, sample return, etc. And we, of course, with our Mars 2117 program, that's what we are looking at. However, to achieve those objectives, we can do a lot around the moon. And we think the moon is key. This is why most of our missions, I would say, if we look at it as a percentage, up to 70% of our focus today is on missions around the moon. And that is, with our different rovers as well as with the Gateway mission itself. And that's our largest mission. So the moon is very important. It's closer, it's a bit easier to get to. It's somewhere where a lot of testing can happen. And then that can then shift and go towards Mars. And that's really the way that we're focusing on, is both are very important. We can work on both at the same time. In the more immediate, next 5 years, we're focusing on moon, and then Mars will, of course, be part of that, because whatever you're developing for the moon can then go and shift towards Mars.
I think it's also that they are related back to Earth, which is an important undermine. The mission objective for the whole probe was to study the climate of Mars. So what does that entail? Besides the discoveries that was made by the mission, it has better understanding of another celestial body and the climate change and what took place in there, for us to reflect how that can happen here on Earth, and what we can do on the long run, giving ourselves more time to understand other climates on celestial bodies. That's one side. The other side is, okay, if we're gonna meet the objective, we'll need resources in the future from space to help us sustain human habitation on the moon or even Mars. And that was one of the objectives that we have for the asteroid belt, is we need to make sure that we have a mission that can explore the asteroids, but also have a lander that can land on one of the asteroids. And this is something that we'll hopefully can grow. So we complete the cycle on the moon as well, where we have part of the lunar gateway having rovers. The only missing key there is another lander, and hopefully together we can do it.
Does the UAE's geographic location here on Earth create a sense of urgency for that? This country's experience with water scarcity, with various climate challenges, extreme heat, etc. Does that create more of a sense of urgency in your view for a lot of the scientific innovation and discovery that something like Hope Probe brings back here to Earth?
Well, I never thought of that, but it might be. What do you think?
I mean, it could be. I think anything that we do in space eventually has to have some benefit for us here on the ground. And we get asked that question a lot, especially when humans go to space. So, what are humans doing? We have Sultan Niadi here, His Excellency. He went to space for 6 months, and I'm sure he gets asked this question a lot, is, what did you do there for 6 months and how did that benefit? And of course, we see a big benefit of everything that the astronauts do in space. So there's hundreds of scientific experiments that they do. It's usually cutting edge. It's usually a lot of stuff that can be done in these environments. Sometimes we're testing new technologies that have never been tested because you didn't need to have those technologies on the ground. So they have to be invented and designed and developed to work in space. And then it spins off to some unique application on the ground here that we never thought of. Some technologies are very efficient in space, power generation, using water, and then of course using every drop of water. So if you'll ask astronauts again, they'll tell you pretty much most of the water is recovered and recycled, and those technologies come back to the ground. So there's that type of spin-off, but also the science they're doing. Today you can print different types of organs and things like that. Anything that we do on Earth on space should come and benefit. And I think the same applies to Mars. The same applies to all of those elements. Now, if we link it to the UAE, at the end of the day, yes, we come from a hard climate, so maybe there'll be focus areas for us. Some of it might be power generation based on solar. Some of it might be climate and looking at the climate elements to make technologies that make it easier to live in difficult areas. But in my opinion, not particularly focused on UAEs.
One side can say that, as humans, we are mostly built out of water. So water is the ancestor for life. But it's true that water is actually one of the main objectives of the Emirates mission to the asteroid belt, where we study the content of water of the asteroids, but will helpfully, eventually help in understanding the water history and formation within our solar system. That's an important factor because that will give us more understanding as well where other sources of water can happen to be. Because again, if we're planning to go further in space, we need to make sure that we have the resources along the way. And that it only brings me back to some of the cultural things that in the old days when people used to they go on caravans of camels. They almost all the time make sure that their route has stops for water, so they can have resources to sustain them to continue on their journey. So yes.
We have just a few minutes left, so I'll ask one very general question and one very specific question. The specific question is MBRSC signed the Artemis Accords, 4.5 years ago or so, in 2020. And you've notably led efforts in a number of the collaborations on specifically Lunar Gateway program. The next step is UAE leading on the airlock, which is an extraordinarily important component part of that. What does that mean in terms of transforming UAE into a multinational space leader on that specific program? And then the general question for time is, what are you most excited about in this space? What are you most inspired for in this space right now as you're thinking through both the incremental progress that you're measured on every single year within your own programs? I just had my annual review with Fred, so I know how that feels. And how do you think through what comes next?
Well, the Artemis Accord was signed by the UAE Space Agency, as you mentioned. We're actually proud to say that we were one of the forming countries that actually drafted the accord alongside our partners in the US and other countries. But that was an understanding and a realization at the time that the second stop where the trend's going internationally is for the exploration of the moon. And we wanted to be part to enable our sector to can participate in this endeavor and these projects. For the more, the last specific question is, one of the things that we always measure, this is one of the trends that we have here to make sure that we are giving the right impact. So the policies, the strategies are assessed all the time on its impact. And we take, cultural impact besides as important as economic and scientific and technology. And those are important. And, we are being in the year of the culture. This year is where we can maximize the impact of space, technology, and science, and related to our culture, make sure that our youth are still inspired to hopefully take the mantle in the future to achieve our goal in the end.
Yeah, I think, with Artemis Accords, that's it's great that the UAE is one of the first signatories. And then for us to come out of there and then have this gateway airlock agreement, I think that's a combination of 20 years of work. When we look at building capabilities from a country that has built nothing in space to a country now that is contributing a significant portion of an international collaboration. So I think
the essential part to making it work.
Yes.
one of the essential parts. I think all of them are important. So for us to go full circle, I think that shows where the UAE has come in the past 20 years. So for me, I think the unique thing about this project, this is one of our first fully international collaborative projects, where typically most of our projects are led by the UAE, and we go into partners and collaborate with them, learn and build, but it's a UAE-centric project. This is an international collaboration, we can say pretty much US-led with deep participation globally, and then the UAE now is coming in there. So for you to come into this type of partnership, you have to have something that you can bring on the table. So that's where I see this significant. And to answer your last question, what am I excited about? Honestly, what drives me, and I think drives a lot of people at MBRC, is that we want to see an Emirati on the surface of the moon within the next 10 years. And I think, we will do everything that we can to make sure that that happens. And part of that is gateway, airlock, and all of these elements. And that's what excites us.
Well, I can't thank you enough for spending this amount of time with us today, Your Excellencies. And thank you to the World Government Summit for allowing us to convene in this space.